Hey, what's up guys? Happy 4th of July from the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. Just checking in today with a little bonus video. I hadn't planned on doing any videos today or even uploading any videos today, but I had an excellent email come into my inbox earlier from Uncle JC of the Mason Jar Mafia asking about yeast strains and his background being as a winemaker and now moving into brandy. He's used to working with some of the Lavlin strains, which are great stuff. They have a whole lineup of excellent yeasts that I've played with many times. But he's wanting to do some more diverse things, you know, various grain things and sugar shines and things of that nature. And so he's curious about some of my yeast recommendations. Wherever you're at today, I hope you're having a happy, safe 4th of July. I hope you had a great day. Me and my family just came back from the 192nd consecutive 4th of July celebration in Little Old Pekin, Indiana, where I'm from. That's our one claim to fame as a town. Longest running consecutive 4th of July celebration in the United States. Obviously, but pretty damn cool nonetheless. So we're normally a part of that. We're normally in the parade with Hell's Half Acre Hellbilly Burlesque Show. Unfortunately, this year, time dictated that we weren't able to be a part of it. We're going to fix that next year, I do believe. So I also want to point out, wearing my Key West Trading Company hat. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Key West Trading Company, Jim Martin, a good friend of mine, I designed an absinthe for him a couple years ago, a true Belle Epoque style Verte absinthe. It is available out there in the market. My buddy Bill Hockett distills it. And you should definitely check it out. So moving on with the questions. So I'm only going to speak from my own experiences and my own preferences, the styles of yeast that I like and what I like about them and why I want to use them. I obviously can't speak to the things that I don't like or the things that I don't use or have not used. So this is just all from my own perspective as a distiller. So for me, at heart, I am an agrarian distiller, a farmer distiller. And because of that, and because of the spirituality that I tie to distillation, the fact that I like to challenge myself, the fact that I like to represent the terroir, the fact that wherever possible, I like to take the still to the material as opposed to the material to the still. I mentioned recently on a podcast that I did an experiment a couple years ago where for several weeks on end, we would go to various different places that had a good running water source, that was good clean water, and we would take and make a simple sugar shine, 1 pound of sugar, 1 pound of corn to 1 gallon of water, and then ferment it with whatever yeast was either in the atmosphere or whatever yeast we captured off of local plant life, etc. We've done the same thing with the Absinthe Project at Musée de Vinoge, alongside my good friend from the Victorian Barroom, Brian Cushing, where we actually made the base alcohol for the absinthe using a yeast that we derived from Grand Wormwood that was on site at Musée de Vinoge. I'm too cornbread to be able to speak any French whatsoever. Anyways, those are the kinds of yeast I like to play with. They're usually POF positive, so those are going to be off flavors that you get that are very unique to wild yeast. Sometimes they don't always finish out fermentation. Sometimes they'll stop short of going dry. You get a little residual sugar, and subsequently you get a little more aromatic character when you distill. On the commercial side, but even before we go to that, on the sugar shine side, generally, if I was just going to make a sugar shine, I'm a big fan of Fleischmann's bread yeast. It's well adapted to that sugar environment and that grain environment. It very much so pulls out the positive attributes of the grain, what made the grain what it was when it was ripe in the field. And as a matter of fact, at my commercial distillery, the house strain that we use commonly on a daily basis probably started off as Fleischmann's bread yeast. Now, it's probably no longer Fleischmann's bread yeast, but something very similar to it, just adapted to my brewing and distilling techniques and, you know, the favoritism that I show specific selections of that yeast over the past 6 to 7 years. I'm a big fan of the Lavlin stuff too. A lot of people here will have used EC 1118, and something that people don't realize about EC 1118 is EC 1118 is kind of the commercial standard for huge industrial wineries and brandy distilleries the world over. It's called Pradal de Mousse, I believe. But you'll see it used in all the huge places that make alcohol. It's because it's a reliable yeast. It's cheap. It's easy to source. You can get a hold of it in dry form. And you just pour it to it, and it doesn't cost a whole lot, and it makes a good quality product. The only problem with EC 1118 is it's a high ethyl acetate, acetyl acetone producer. So there's certain styles of spirits, certain types of rums and things like that where you really want that. There's other spirits where that's not necessarily positive, particularly in white spirits where you're going to cut very clean for your heart's cut. The more acetaldehyde that you're producing, the more heads that you're going to end up having to cut out. The other thing that happens is if you produce any SO2 at all, that SO2 actually bonds to acetaldehyde. So you're going to get more of that sulfury sort of characteristic coming off of your spirit. There are instances, especially with certain single malt styles that you run off of a worm that you're going to age for a good amount of time, where you want some of that kind of, for lack of a better terminology, meaty sort of character. But that's meat, not mead. I'm very cornbread today, I apologize. But most spirits, you're not going to want that characteristic, I don't believe. Cigarette went out. That's okay. I don't need it anyways. So on the commercial side as well, here's what I will say. So there are better alternatives out there. And I don't know that these are available to most home distillers yet, although I hope they will be one day. And I'm going to mention two in particular. So the first is Vin 13. That's a South African brandy yeast, very similar to EC 1118, but it is a low SO2 producer, meaning that it actually is a low acetaldehyde producer. Fantastic yeast. It runs fast, it runs hard, and you can get good alcohol out of it. Now, the only thing I will say about some of these strains too, they are attenuated to very high ABV washes or mashes. You don't necessarily want that with whiskey or brandy production. You know, with whiskey, around that 7, 8, 9% alcohol is good. You know, with certain brandies, a lot of the fruit brandies, you really want a little lower than that. 5, 6, 7% alcohol is ideal for your flavor that you're going to get off double pot still mode and all that sort of stuff that you really want to play with around with at home or for white spirit, things of that nature. The other one that's out there that I like even better is called OK yeast, and both those, I think, Vin 13 and OK, come from Scott Labs. OK yeast is very similar to Vin 13, but it's even cleaner yet. That's the one that I rely on a lot at my commercial distillery. Some of the other ones that are out there, you're going to see Daddy, Distiller's Active Dry Yeast, and that is pretty ubiquitous as a whiskey yeast. You know, if you want to make a Kentucky-style bourbon, that's a good one to lean on. Somebody else that you might lean on informationally would be Dr. Pat Heiss down at Wilderness Trail Distillery and Firm Solutions. Dr. Pat Heiss has got thousands of yeast strains that he's isolated from all over the place, but particularly in Kentucky. And if there's a brand that you like, as far as bourbon goes, Pat Heiss can probably point you in the direction of a yeast that would match that particular profile. So those are all out there. The thing I'd say is stay away from turbo yeast. I know there are people that swear by it for grain neutral spirits. Here's what I'll say. Grain neutral spirits are not always, they're not ever really completely grain neutral, because there's still a little water in the matrix, which means there's still a little flavor in the matrix. And the problem with the turbo yeast is, even though it'll run through something incredibly fast, it's primarily EC 1118 yeast with a bunch of yeast nutrient and a bunch of startup in it. The problem with those yeast nutrients is that they have a lot of minerals in them, and those minerals have a very specific flavor that carry over during distillation. You're going to get some of that flavor even in a neutral grain spirit made from turbo yeast. I would say stay away from it. If you want something that'll do something very similar to turbo yeast but make a very cool, very flavorful, very interesting product, my favorite yeast strains, sure, the wild ones I've collected, the ones I've collected from some of the old distilleries around southern Indiana. We've talked about collecting yeast here on the channel before. We've even talked about how you would go about doing it and then how you would maintain it in a Donna jug or on a Norse Magic log. My favorite yeast strains outside of all of these tend to be the Kveik strains. These are old Norwegian farmhouse brewing strains. So the old farmhouse brewing strains, the Norwegians were mostly brewing their beer in their sane houses, their malt houses, where they're running furnaces all the time to dry down their malt. So those houses get very hot. Kveik strains are still C. cerevisiae. You can drop the S. cerevisiae, whatever. Anyways, you can drop those in at high temp, 110 or so. You can ferment them at 110. And here's a crazy thing. They're adapted to it, and they create crazy flavor profiles. Think mango, pineapple, fruity, funky stuff. There's a lot of great commercial isolates out there. A lot of home brewers also collect old Kveik yeast strains. Think of them as heirloom yeast the same way you think of heirloom seeds. They've been passed down for hundreds of generations. Well, not hundreds of generations of people, but thousands of generations of yeast. Several generations of people, maybe 100, I don't know. Have to look it up. But they're incredibly interesting. A lot of what's out there available commercially is isolated strains. What I like to do is I take those isolated strains, find the ones I like, and I start blending them together, because that's the way that the old Kveik strains were. They were usually actually 3 or 4 different strains of yeast carried in a liquid or powdered culture. They work extremely well for distillation. It may take them a little while to get attenuated to where they finish a mash completely dry, because typically with beer you're not going completely dry, but they will get there. They can get there. They're very efficient. They make an excellent product for aging or drinking neat, and I cannot recommend them enough. We've got one going now where we've probably taken 13 or 14 different isolates and put them back together into a matrix to make our own Kveik strain. I don't know how many of those strains are still in that matrix. The ones that are there, they make damn good product. Hope I answered your question. If you guys have any questions at all, don't forget to reach out to bishopshomegrown@gmail.com or on any of the social media or in the YouTube comments below, guys. Happy 4th of July. Hope you enjoyed the bonus video. I love y'all. Stay safe. Talk to you later.